Well, my name is Earl Ingram, and my home's in North Carolina. And I joined the Army as a young soldier in 1940. I was 17 years old, and after several years training and moving from one unit to another, I was eventually signed to duty in Europe, and I entered France in August of 1944, and I was then assigned eventually to the 2nd Infantry Division, which was involved in the capture of Brest in September. And I arrived in early September, and soon after I arrived, the Germans surrendered in Brest, and then the 2nd Infantry Division, after a short period of time, they were moved. This division was moved to the German-Belgian border, and the unit that I was with Company L of the 38th Infantry. We were actually relieved a unit which was inside the first belt of the Siegfried Line in the Schineafeld area. And we were there for a couple of months, and then we were withdrawn from there and moved north to participate in an operation with the 5th Corps to seize the Roer River dams, which were could have been very difficult for the 5th Corps and the 21st Army Group, which was to our north. There was a big campaign being, a big campaign or operation being prepared by the 21st Army to move across northern Virginia. But if the Germans blew the Roer River dams, we would, the area would be flooded, and that would not be possible. So, but during that time, this was in early December, as you all know, the Battle of the Ardennes, we call the Battle of the Bulge, began with on December the 16th, and as a result of that, 2nd Infantry Division was heavily involved in the Battle of the Bulge on the north shoulder of the Bulge. And we were in that position for about 6 weeks, and eventually, when the Battle of the Bulge was ended, which was probably about mid-January, in early February, we started the offensive again, and we continued to move to the Rhine, and then after the Rhine, we moved by tanks and trucks, sometimes walking, and the 2nd Infantry Division then arrived in the area of Leipzig in April and participated in the capture of Leipzig. So after mid-April, after Leipzig fell, 2nd Infantry Division then moved south. My regiment was moved to the area of Grimma, which is on the Mulde River, and we were there for a short time. Then we received orders on the 1st of May. We made a night move from Grimma to the south. And this was part of the reorientation of U.S. units. We were, at that time, assigned to operational control of the 5th U.S. Corps under the 1st U.S. Army. But the 5th Corps was being shifted to the south to be assigned to the 3rd Army under General Patton to participate in the last drive really into Czechoslovakia. So when we moved south from Leipzig, we went to an assembly area. We stayed in that assembly area overnight, and then the next day we relieved a unit of the Third Army, which was the 90th Infantry Division. We relieved units in the 90th Infantry Division. They were already in Czechoslovakia. And we stayed in that position for a couple of days, and then we started moving forward again. And this was after the 5th Corps was in place and placed under the operational control of the 3rd Army under General Patton. So we started moving toward Pilsen from the southwest. 97th Infantry Division was moving from due west to Pilsen. 2nd Infantry Division was moving from the southwest. And as everyone knows, the uprising or challenge to the German occupation occurred. The Corps commander, General Hubner, the 5th Corps commander, he gave orders to the 16th Armored Division to pass through the 97th Infantry Division and the 2nd Infantry Division and to move to Pilsen with the utmost haste. Meanwhile, the 97th continued to move toward Pilsen, the 2nd Infantry Division continued to move toward Pilsen. And as we know, after the 16th Armored Division passed through the 2nd and the 97th, then they were in Pilsen within 2 hours. And a short time after that, of course, the German commander surrendered. My unit had continued to move from the southwest, and on the night of 5 May, we had spent the night in Stode, which was maybe 15, 16 kilometers south of southwest of Pilsen. And the next day we continued to move again on the 6th. And I should say the night of the 6th we spent in Stode. The 7th we started to move on into Pilsen, and we received information then that the Germans were going to surrender and we would cease all operations to as far as continuing the attack, because the Germans had surrendered, were due to surrender formally on the 8th, the next day. But we continued to move on into Pilsen, and of course we arrived late in the afternoon on the 7th of May. And my unit was, when we arrived in Pilsen, of course I saw a lot of happy people. And we were taken into the billets. People took us into their homes, and they gave us their beds and their bathtubs, and we really began to feel civilized again. I just saw the happiest, most grateful people I had ever seen at that time. And I was in Pilsen, my unit was in Pilsen for about 2 weeks, and then we were sent to the demarcation line, the line between the Soviet or the Red Army and the American Army, which was not too far to the east, Rakasani, and along the line the villages of Krishna and Brassy. In my case, my platoon, I was a rifle platoon leader, and I was the first lieutenant. I had about 40 men, and I was on duty in the demarcation line, roadblock duty. My platoon was in Krishna. The Soviets or Russians were on the other side in Brassy, and that was the line, and we were there for about 2 weeks, and then we were relieved by another American unit. The 8th Armored Division relieved us, and we moved south from the assembly area and were scheduled to move. In fact, we did move first down to the assembly area, which was west of, or I should say just to the east of Regensburg. Then we were trucked over to Regensburg, placed on trucks, to Regensburg, and then on a train from there back to the coast of France. We were earmarked to go to the Pacific because the war in the Pacific was still going on, and we actually arrived back in New York in July. And when I left Czechoslovakia at that time, I never had any idea that I would ever return. So when my unit was reassembled down in Texas in August of 1945, after we had leave for furlough or rest and recreation with our families and so on. And I was on a beach in North Carolina with my wife, and in early August, when we received information that the atomic bombs had been dropped, the division was still, the soldiers were still required to report for duty down in Texas, where the division was to be reassembled. But as a result of the war ending with Japan, soldiers, American soldiers who had accumulated a sufficient number of points could be released, and so I opted to be released from the Army at that time. And this took a little while, but I was released in early October, and then I had accumulated leave time, so my service in the Army actually ended in mid-December of '45. So I left the uniform. I left the Army, I took off my uniform. And after a couple of months, I re-entered the Army, and I became a career soldier. And during that time, later I was assigned to duty in Germany in 1961, and I spent 3 years in Germany, 61 to 64. My duties during that period required me to travel to the border of Czechoslovakia and East Germany. And I can recall that on one of my visits to one of the units on the border, I can remember flying in a small plane, and I could see, of course, over into Czechoslovakia, and I never thought that I would return to see those people whom I had met in May of 1945, who had been so grateful and had been so kind to us, and made us feel human again after months of war. And it never occurred to me that I would ever return to see those people. Well, strange things happened, because in 1994, my wife and I were in Germany, and I wanted to retrace the steps of my division. And I started at the German-Belgian border, and we drove a general route that the 2nd Infantry Division had traveled in 1944 and 45. So I returned to Pilsen, and it was in April, and I learned then that the celebrations were occurring in Pilsen the first week in May. So I made sure that the next trip I made, the next year, I made the timing right to join the celebrations in 1995, and that was my first one. Well, I was able, through an interpreter and information I received from a fellow veteran, to find the apartment building where I had stayed with some of my men in May of 1945. It was not easy to find this place, but I knew that if I could find one certain building, then I could find the apartment building where I was staying. So my interpreter was very good, and we found that place finally. And then I said, let's go down to this apartment building. We went down to the apartment building, And I said, ring that bell. So she pushed the button. There was no answer. I said, ring the next one. So this is up the next floor. So a lady answered. She opened the door, unlocked the door so we could go upstairs. And so I asked the interpreter, I said, ask the lady if any Americans stayed here in May of 1945. And of course they're speaking in Czech. I didn't understand anything until the lady said, Ingram, my name. Well, you can imagine the chills that went through my body when I heard my name mentioned, and I said, I'm Ingram, I'm Ingram. Meanwhile, a lady who lived up on the next floor, she came down the stairs, and she heard all the commotion in the stairwell. And I turned to my wife, who was standing beside me. I said, I know that lady. And she came down, and I finally got my interpreter to tell these two ladies that I'm Ingram. And the lady who came down the stairs, she came down real close to me, and she took my face in her hand. She turned my face one way and then the other. She said, yes, that's Ingram. This is after 50 years. And it's a feeling that it's difficult to describe. It's one of the best reunions that I ever experienced in my life. And since that time, I've been back to Pilsen many, many times, and I have I maintained contact with those two ladies as long as they lived, and I have maintained contact with their children, their grandchildren, and now I know even their great-grandchildren. So it's a real thrill for me to come back to Pilsen and participate in the Liberation Festival and see the people who are so grateful after all the years. They're grateful for the fact that we were there. Well, I was just a soldier like all the other veterans who were following the orders they were given. We had no control over that, but it's just great to know that we participated in something that has changed the lives of so many people that we recognize hold the same values that we hold. And it's just, it's a heartwarming feeling that is difficult to describe to people who have not been through this particular experience. And for that I'm grateful. I'm glad I've lived so long that I've been able to see the concrete results of what many of my fellow soldiers were never fortunate enough to live to see. A great price was paid for us to be here, for us to be able to return to Pilsen and to see this. And it's something that I hope the people who live here now, their children and their children's children will continue to talk about and remember, because we all cherish the same things. And we just hope that this will continue, and that the Czech people will never have to undergo the suffering that they endured during World War II and the suffering that they endured after World War II before the Velvet Revolution, when they regained their freedom.